Florida is back in the headlines again, this time for a wave of restaurant closures hitting Miami and beyond. News outlets are quick to point fingers at inflation, hurricanes, or high rent. But there's one piece of the puzzle they never talk about: the Canadians. For decades, nearly 1 million Canadian snowbirds flocked south every winter. They bought homes, booked hotels, and spent billions in restaurants, keeping Florida's hospitality industry alive during the slow months. But in the past year, something has changed. Many Canadians are packing up, selling their Florida properties, and saying goodbye for good. And here's where things get interesting. Without those visitors, Florida isn't just losing real estate buyers. It's losing the very customers that restaurants and hotels relied on to survive. What used to be bustling tourist districts are now seeing empty dining rooms, shuttered kitchens, and even major hotel lobbies sitting nearly deserted. Yet, if you turn on the news in the United States, you'll barely hear a word about this missing group of international tourists. It's as if the media would rather keep the focus on inflation than admit that Florida's economic foundation may have been built on the backs of foreign visitors. So today, we're going to dig into whether Canada just destroyed Florida's restaurant industry and how the loss of snowbirds might be the first domino in a much bigger collapse. Stick around because the story goes far deeper than what you've been told. And before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so more people can see the real story behind Florida's unraveling. For decades, Canadians have been the lifeblood of Florida's winter economy. Each year, close to 1 million snowbirds packed their bags, escaped the cold, and headed south to spend months in the Sunshine State. They didn't just come for the beaches. They bought homes, filled hotel rooms, and most importantly, poured money into restaurants, bars, and local shops. In fact, in the year 2024, Canadians made up about 13% of all foreign buyers in the entire United States housing market, with the majority of those purchases happening in Florida and Arizona. That is a massive slice of the pie. But something has shifted. Over the past 12 months, Canadian media has been reporting a trend that U.S. outlets barely mention: snowbirds selling their Florida homes and deciding not to return. Some of this is financial. The Canadian dollar is weaker, making everything from groceries to rent more expensive. Some of it is political. New American rules require Canadians to register if they stay longer than 30 days, and cross-border tensions have left many feeling unwelcome. Florida real estate agents have confirmed what the headlines suggest. One agent said she usually juggles around 10 listings in a high season, but this past year she was handling more than 30 at once, almost all from Canadians looking to sell. These aren't just seasonal visitors skipping a year. For many families, this is goodbye forever. And with them goes the steady stream of dollars that kept Florida's hospitality sector thriving, even in the offs. By the summer of 2025, the cracks in Florida's restaurant industry were impossible to ignore. In Miami alone, some of the city's most beloved spots closed their doors for good. Andimo Brick Oven Pizza, a neighborhood favorite that had been serving slices for more than 25 years, announced it was shutting down. Chica, which had carved out a reputation over 6 years, also closed. And perhaps most shocking of all, Osteria di Liatro, an iconic Italian restaurant that survived for 4 decades, finally said goodbye. Even Sardinia, a well-known Miami Beach staple, could not hang on. It wasn't just the long-standing institutions that folded. Newer restaurants struggled too. Flora Plant Kitchen, a trendy plant-based dairy, reported that sales were down by nearly 40% compared to just a few months earlier in the spring. Another restaurant, Insignia, which had been open for less than a year, announced on social media that it was closing forever. If you listened only to local news reports, you'd think these businesses were victims of nothing more than inflation, rising rent, or the seasonal slowdown caused by scorching summers and hurricanes. And yes, those pressures are real. But what the coverage consistently left out was the missing tourists, especially the Canadian snowbirds, who once kept dining rooms full when locals and domestic travelers stayed away. When a restaurant that survived 40 years suddenly cannot make it through one more season, you know something deeper is happening. The question is, why won't anyone admit it? Florida has always had its slow season. Summers bring extreme heat, hurricane warnings, and fewer domestic visitors. Normally, that's not a disaster because international tourists, especially Canadians, fill in the gap. For decades, snowbirds gave restaurants a dependable stream of customers, ensuring that even during the off-season, tables stayed occupied and bills got paid. But in 2025, that cushion is gone. Restaurants that once counted on Canadians and other international travelers now face empty dining rooms. Owners are trying to adapt by reducing dinner hours, scaling back staff, or switching to smaller menus just to survive. Some have even stopped opening at night altogether because the cost of staying open outweighs the handful of customers they might see. Domestic tourism simply cannot make up the difference. Many Americans are already stretched thin by rising grocery bills, housing costs, and gas prices. A weekend trip to Miami or Fort Lauderdale is no longer affordable for millions of families. And those who do visit often cut corners, skipping sit-down restaurants for cheaper options. The result is a domino effect. Fewer tourists mean emptier restaurants. Emptier restaurants mean layoffs, reduced wages, and less money circulating in the community. That in turn affects hotels, shops, and even real estate. It is a chain reaction, and at the center of it is the missing international visitor. Florida can blame inflation all it wants, but without snowbirds returning in force, the hospitality industry is left exposed, and the cracks are only widening. The restaurant crisis in Florida cannot be separated from what is happening in housing. For years, Florida's booming real estate market seemed unstoppable. Builders put up new homes at record speed, fueled by people relocating during the pandemic and by Canadian snowbirds buying winter properties. Prices shot up by as much as 50 to 60% in only 3 years, but what goes up quickly often comes down just as fast. By 2025, the housing picture looked very different. Statewide home values fell by more than 3% in just 12 months, and in places like Manatee County, the drop was closer to 6%. Realtors reported a growing surplus of unsold homes sitting on the market for 4 to 5 months instead of selling within weeks. The reason demand has collapsed: inbound migration to Florida has plummeted by 80% compared to the height of the pandemic. And a huge part of that drop comes from Canadians leaving. As they sell their properties and decide not to return, the steady pipeline of foreign buyers and renters dries up. Builders, however, have not slowed down. They continue to flood the market with new supply, which only drives prices further down. This isn't just a housing story. Every unsold condo or abandoned snowbird townhouse is one less household spending money at the local cafe, diner, or bar. The housing domino falls and the restaurants fall with it. Just like in 2008, the ripple effects reach far beyond real estate. If you really want to see how serious the problem has become, just look inside Florida's hotels. In late August of 2025, an on-their-ground video from Fort Lauderdale showed the Embassy Suites on 17th Street Causeway, a 361-room hotel, almost completely empty. The lobby looked deserted. The restaurant and bar had no customers, and the atmosphere felt more like a building preparing to close than a resort welcoming guests. Yes, August is always a slower month in Florida, but empty lobbies and silent restaurants are not normal, even during the off-season. International tourists and Canadian snowbirds used to keep these places alive. They would book rooms, order meals, and fill the bars. Without them, the difference is striking. This emptiness tells two important truths. First, domestic tourism is not strong enough to replace the international visitors Florida once relied on. Second, average Americans are too financially squeezed to pick up the slack. With grocery bills and housing costs eating up paychecks, many families simply cannot justify the expense of a Florida vacation. Hotels are the clearest evidence of the domino effect. When rooms go unsold, restaurants inside the hotels lose business. When hotel bars sit empty, servers and bartenders lose hours. And when hotels themselves cut staff, the entire local economy feels the hit. The missing snowbirds are not just absent from restaurants. Their absence ripples through every corner of Florida's hospitality industry. When you watch the news in the United States, the story of Florida's economic troubles always sounds the same. Inflation is too high, rent is unaffordable, hurricanes are driving up insurance costs, and businesses are simply struggling with overhead. All of that is true, but it is not the full story. What you almost never hear is how deeply Florida relied on Canadian snowbirds and other international tourists to keep its economy stable. On the Canadian side, the reporting looks a little different. Networks like CTV have openly shown families selling their Florida properties after decades of spending winters there. They talk about the weaker Canadian dollar, new American rules that force visitors to register after 30 days, and the feeling of no longer being welcome across the border. These are huge factors in why so many Canadians have chosen to stay home. Yet neither side is putting the pieces together. The Americans frame it as a cost of living problem. The Canadians frame it as a travel or political issue. But the reality is that Florida's hospitality sector was built on the spending power of snowbirds, and now that spending is gone, the evidence on the ground makes the connection impossible to ignore. Shuttered restaurants, empty hotel lobbies, and a housing market teetering like it did in 2008. Still, state leaders and much of the media seem unwilling to admit just how dependent Florida was on foreign visitors. The longer they deny it, the more dominoes will fall. Florida's restaurant collapse isn't just about inflation or hurricanes. It's about losing the Canadians who once kept the state's economy afloat. From shuttered kitchens to empty hotels, the impact is undeniable. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit like, subscribe, and share so more people see the full story.